The Long Road to True Happiness by WierdRandomTina. Chapter 27. No Longer Alone. It was another busy Saturday morning for Princess Poppy, but, as usual, she wore a bright smile on her pink freckled face. Everyone seemed extra chipper today, but then again, how could they not be on a day as perfect as today? A group of rare and beautiful birds had settled in the village's trees, chirping lovely melodies. Yesterday's cold and rainy and windy weather was long forgotten with today's warm, cloudless sky. Plus, the clean-up from the storm was already almost finished. Poppy had turned it into a game for extra motivation, and it proved effective. Poppy's mood brightened even more when she finally spotted her beloved best friend, his bold and unique colours easily distinguishable, even from a distance, where he looked no bigger than her thumb. He was beyond a giant crowd of trolls, along the outskirts as usual, strolling off in the opposite direction, toward the centre of the village. The princess hurried to catch up to him, planning to sneak up behind him and attack him with a surprise hug. Branch's reactions cracked her up every time. First off, he'd nearly jumped out of his skin, letting out that hilarious yelp of his. Secondly, he'd scold her for terrifying him, while wearing his hypocritical warm smirk. Lastly, he'd tell her to let go of him, in the least forceful tone possible, and without even attempting to escape, even when she loosened her grip. It made Poppy want to squeal just thinking of it. But her giddy feeling was short-lived once she caught up with Branch, and saw him closer up. Something was not right. She'd grown used to the lovely hint of dark navy blue in his hair, the soft turquoise tint of his skin. It had been especially noticeable since earlier in the week, when she reassured him that they could be together. Yet, even in this strong sunlight, those colours were absent. His complexion was so dull, and his hair so dark, almost as grey and black as when before they became friends. Something was definitely wrong. Forgetting her sneak hug, Poppy burst through the branches. "Branch!" At the sound of leaves rustling and his name being shouted, Branch turned around, seemingly in slow motion. "Hey, Poppy." His tone was flatter than a piece of paper. His expression was just as blank. His eyes were weary, unfocused, and lacking their sweet, light blue shine. Something was very wrong. His despondency brought another, even stronger wave of concern onto her. She'd much rather have him scowl and snap at her. At least that would seem semi-normal. Anxiety creeping in, Poppy rushed over to him, frantically asking a string of questions. "What is it? Are you sick? Are you hurt? Did someone say something to you? Was it Creek? Now what did he say? Or was it someone else? Something else?" To her surprise, Branch chuckled, albeit half-heartedly. "I'm that easy to read, huh?" Poppy wasn't sure how to feel about him lightly joking when he looked so depressed. Not to mention he didn't even try to claim that it was nothing. So she waited, silently begging for an explanation. "I'm okay. It's just... today is a hard day for me. It's the day my grandma..." His eyes closed and his ears drooped. Branch didn't need to finish the sentence. Poppy's little pink hands flew up to cover her mouth. "Oh, Branch, I'm so sorry." She moved forward to give him a sympathetic hug. Receiving comfort was still a bit cringy for him, even when it was from Poppy. But he was grateful for her support regardless, and appreciative that she no longer tried to dismiss his troubles and force him to cheer up. And once the temporary cringe wore off, her hugs were very comforting. She put her hands on either side of his face, looking him softly in the eyes, and asked, "What can I do to make today easier for you? I'll do anything you want. I'll stop the whole village if it'll help you feel better." Branch chuckled again, putting one hand over hers and giving it a gentle squeeze. "Thank you, Poppy. But honestly, the best thing would be for everything to continue on as normally as possible. I've always dealt with it alone, concealed in the shadows, with no way to distract myself from the grief, the flashbacks, the... He took a deep, slow breath before getting to the point. I just want to try to keep my mind occupied with literally anything else. Poppy nodded vigorously. Yes, okay, I can do that. She took hold of his hands instead. Hey, you know, there's going to be a whole bunch of small-scale events and casual stuff going on today that I'm overseeing. Would you like to tag along? Yeah, please. So, for the whole day, Branch accompanied the princess, and they travelled throughout almost the entire village. There were events of all kinds. A cake decorating contest, several birthday mini-parties, dessert taste testing, checking up on the new daycare program, attending a small theatre play, a food fight tournament, to name a few. Sometimes Branch would stay back and observe. Occasionally, he would get slightly involved. They also took a nice hike around the lake with King Peppy. Poppy had informed him of Branch's past 2 days after she found out about it herself. So this morning, while Branch was chatting with Satin and Chenille, Poppy had pulled her dad aside, once they were out of earshot. She briefly and discreetly mentioned the significance of today, and how Branch wanted to cope with it. So Peppy never brought up the tragic event in any way, never even hinting that he knew anything about it. He didn't act any differently around Branch. Instead, the king maintained a general and casual conversation, plus he threw in his usual dorky jokes every now and then. Poppy treated Branch pretty much the same as always too. Her normal cheery amount of joy and affection, no immoderate cheeriness, and no sappy pity. She kept an eye on him, stealing glimpses at him now and then, to make sure he was not on the verge of breaking down. But she only questioned a handful of times if he was all right, and her question was simply, "You good?" If he started to zone out for a noticeable amount of time, Poppy would find some discreet way to bring his focus back to the present. It was exactly what he needed. Branch had ups and downs. His demeanour was off all day, but considering the circumstances, Poppy thought he was coping quite well overall. If anyone questioned if he was okay, or hinted that he seemed extra quiet or down, Poppy simply told them that he was tired and had a headache, both of which were technically true. Branch went along with that excuse too. Poppy resisted the urge to ask him every 10 seconds if he was okay. He wanted to be distracted from his own thoughts and kept occupied, so that's what she did. And the tactics seemed to be working. While he never fully focused on what was going on around him, most of the activities he had little interest in even on regular days. The constant bustle kept his mind out of the darkest places, and that was enough. She'd much rather Branch be thinking about how much he hates glitter, or how weird the theatre play was, or how many rules to a formal food fight are confusing. Without Branch or anyone else knowing, Poppy reviewed the music playlists to make sure that song wasn't queued to play in any locations they'd be near today. She found it in 2 places and quickly removed it from the lists. The last thing he needed was for the worst reminder possible to blast into his ears when he'd finally started to relax. If that happened today, the resulting panic attack would surely be 10 times worse than one at an informal karaoke party. After the final birthday mini-party, Poppy had to return to her pod to pick up some supplies for the craft sale. She grabbed her trusty container of varying beads, a bottle of gold glitter, assorted pipe cleaners. Then she noticed Branch was staring down listlessly at her carpet. She had to say his name twice before he looked up at her. His eyes weren't watering, but they looked so sad. Before Poppy could ask if he was okay, he lightly asked her, "Whenever you're done gathering your supplies, could I have a hug?" Never mind finishing what she was doing. She immediately dropped everything onto the floor and cleared the distance between them in a single leap. Other than the glitter bottle sliding off the container and onto the floor, there was pure silence in the pod as the 2 trolls hugged. Poppy didn't care if she was late to the craft sale. She could easily make up a reasonable excuse. Branch needed her. His well-being was much more important. But a minute-long hug was all Branch needed. When he pulled back, his eyes looked a little brighter, maybe even a bit blue. She took hold of one of his hands, then she asked, "Wanna help me carry some of this stuff?" "You aren't gonna make me take all that glitter bottle, are you?" Dry humour. That was a good sign. Poppy snickered. No, I'll get those. If you could just grab the beads and the purple toolbox over there, that'd be perfect. As soon as the water balloon freestyle fight was about to begin, Poppy assumed Branch would stay on the sidelines for this one. And he did. So she was surprised by a large orange balloon hitting her in the shoulder, splashing water all over her side and face. And when she looked to find the source, she found Branch lightly smirking at her. With mock annoyance, the princess tossed a smaller purple one back at him, and missed completely, the balloon splattering in the bushes far behind him. She kept tossing balloons at him, but as usual, the athletic troll was able to dodge all her attacks with ease, as if they were flying towards him in slow motion. Even when Biggie and Smidge joined in, Branch was still untouchable. 3 versus 1, Branch teased. That's not a fair fight. Not fair for you, or not fair for us, Smidge exclaimed, hurling at another balloon that went flying harmlessly into the bushes. To answer her question, Branch grabbed 3 balloons seemingly out of nowhere with his hair and tossed all 3 of them at the same time, hitting all 3 of his opponents at the same time. Poppy, Biggie and Smidge stood there for a few seconds, stunned and soaked, then burst out laughing. Next up was something Branch was only willing to attend because he really wanted to keep his mind busy. The Total Tidal Wave Water Park. It was the newest and largest water park in the entire village, and also the most dangerous. There were at least 3 dozen slides, each a different colour and shape. Some were so steep they were seemingly vertical. Others appeared to be a mile long. All consisted of dizzying swirls, insane twists, and extreme turns. And to make matters even worse, none of the slides were monitored. Trolls would just blindly propel themselves down on their floaties, one after another, never waiting long enough for the other troll ahead of them to clear the passage, never checking to see if the area around the slide's exit was clear, especially since for some dumb reason that was a popular swimming area. By some miracle there had been no life-threatening injuries, but it was only a matter of time before bruises and sprains escalated to something much worse. However, when Branch arrived at the Total Tidal Wave Park, he was surprised to see some changes. Basic but important safety features he had suggested soon after the park's grand opening. Things he had practically begged Poppy to install/enforce. But the princess had originally dismissed them all as unnecessary and claimed it would make the park less fun. He'd argued it would make the park less dangerous, and that was far more important. But, as often happened back then, he'd been ignored. Branch had tried expressing his ideas to Peppy. The king's original response had been, "Best talk to Poppy about that. After her princess coronation, I put her in charge of all the village's varying amusement parks." When Branch pointed out that he had already tried talking to her, Peppy assured him he would discuss it with his daughter. The king had Peppy put up signs warning trolls to avoid swimming near the slide exits and advising trolls to wait their turn until the slide was clear. But nearly every troll disregarded the 2 small caution signs and continued with their unsafe antics. Yet now, even from way down on the ground, Branch could see that those signs had been upgraded. They were more noticeable, with a larger and more vibrant font. He also noticed a troll was stationed at the top of each slide, watching to make sure the previous troll was visible in the water below before allowing the next troll in line to advance. The area around the bottom of the slides was encircled by brightly lit round buoys, so the trolls knew to avoid swimming there. Branch even spotted a few extra support beams on the most precarious parts of the slide. Out of the corner of her eye, Poppy watched as Branch studied the water park. He didn't make any remark, but she hoped he had noticed the little modifications she had added over the last week or 2. In the beginning, With her new status as amusement park manager, she wanted to make the parks as fun as can be, insanely fun, but wasn't willing to listen to him and his boring and complicated advice. She had put up small signs with very light warnings, only because her dad said it was a good idea. But after learning of Branch's traumatic past, and discovering that he cared about others more than he always let on, Poppy finally decided to give his ideas a try. After all, there was no harm in trying something new. And, as it turned out, those ideas didn't make the park any less fun. In fact, once she added some of her own cheery little twists, colourful, fancier signs so trolls would be more likely to read them, mini-games to play along the way while waiting in line, tic-tac-troll, a doodle board, trivia cards and more, the sparkly buoys marking the potential danger zones in the water, switching up the side guards every now and then so that they can join in the fun too. It made the park even more fun. And thanks to Branch, it was now safer too. Everyone had been very easygoing about trying the new system, and the entire village was pleased with its result. Every day there was a surprising amount of trolls volunteering to be monitors. They had fun with the job, but also took it seriously, accepting and following the slightly unconventional rules without any complaint. Poppy's dad was especially pleased with the compromise.
"You figured out the perfect balance of fun and safety,"
he had said 3 days ago.
"I'm very proud of you. You were open to another troll's opinion and accepted a different perspective. That's exactly what a queen needs to be able to do."
A twinkle appeared in the king's amber eyes, and one of his bushy magenta eyebrows raised ever so slightly.
"You and Branch have very opposing views, but neither of you are right, and neither of you are wrong. Instead, both of your views combine to make one great idea. I must say, you two do make an effective team."
Poppy blushed a bit at the slight implication. Thanks, Dad. We really do. Later in the afternoon, Poppy, Branch and the snack pack gathered at a refreshment table for some lemonade. All 9 of them were contentedly caught up in a nice conversation about Halloween. So no one noticed that another troll had approached them.
"Well, I am absolutely shocked."
All chatter ceased, and all eyes turned to the smooth-accented voice. His lavender arms were crossed over his chest, and the green top of his hair was curled forward, and his freckled expression was smug.
"Never thought I'd see the day Branch participates in fun activities."
Creek focused his attention onto the object of his ridicule, and finished nonchalantly.
"I do believe sulking, temper tantrums, and paranoid freakouts are more your style. Wouldn't you say, mate?"
Poppy plus her 7 friends all gasped at their former friend's blatantly spiteful words. Branch didn't have enough energy to make a sarcastic comment or a rebound insult, so he merely lowered his head dejectedly. The snack pack, however, instantly defended their new friend. Biggie looked offended, as if the insult had been directed at him. "That's not fair!" Saturn and Chenille simultaneously put their hands on their hips and scowled. "Seriously, Creek?" Cooper's mouth gaped open in pure shock, while Smidge was literally vibrating in anger, her hands balled into fists and her bright blue eyes piercing Creek like lasers. Guy Diamond shook his head and scolded. "Come on, don't be like that. Not cool, dude," DJ Suki exclaimed, glaring fiercely at him. Meanwhile, Poppy had moved protectively in front of Branch. Her face told everyone she was more than just annoyed. She was mad. And her comment overpowered all others. "Leave him alone, Creek! You don't know anything about him, so stop acting like you do! Go away!" The entire area fell silent. Even the birds overhead quit chirping. Everyone, including Creek and Branch, stared in startled shock at the pink troll. Their sweet princess who had never once snapped at anyone for any reason. So Creek turned and left without another word, still flabbergasted that Poppy would use such a tone. As the heat of the moment cooled off, Poppy's uncharacteristic glare vanished. She glanced nervously at her companions. "I'm so sorry, you guys. I didn't mean to be so. That was really—"
"There is no reason to be sorry for what you just did," Biggie firmly assured her. "Poppy, are you kidding? That was sick!
DJ Suki praised her. Way to go, Broppy! Cooper cheered. The twins approved with a synchronized nod.
He needed to be told, Guy agreed. He has no right to say such cruel things.
Smidge was still riled up.
It's a good thing you got rid of him, or he would have hair-punched him in his stupid, arrogant face!
The little yellow troll suddenly relaxed.
Sorry, I'm good now.
Before anyone else could comment, the gang's hung-time bracelets flowered. The 8 colourful trolls extended warm smiles as the tension visibly melted away. Led by no one in particular, they settled into a group hug, with their magenta princess nestled in the middle. After a second, Poppy peeked one eye open to check on Branch's status. He hadn't moved from his spot a few troll lengths away from them, but he didn't look as sad. However, he also kept stealing glances at them. He was looking at them shyly, almost longingly. Hey, Branch! At the sound of Poppy's voice, Branch's gaze met hers. She then held out an arm and gently questioned, You want in on this? The whole snack pack plus Poppy was staring expectantly at him now. When he looked down at the grass, they expected him to ignore or decline the offer. But then, Branch started towards them. It was an awkward and slightly hesitant gait, but he was definitely making his way over to their awaiting circle. Their faces brightened with every little step he took. With Branch finally standing in the middle of the group, Poppy tenderly wrapped her arms around him, and her friends followed suit. Within 2 seconds, Branch was engulfed by a colourful ball of trolls. It was highly uncomfortable at first. He just stood there tensely, with everyone's arms and bodies around him. DJ Suki was squishing the left side of his face. Smidge was gripping his waist like a trolling. Biggie was leaning into his hair, and the excessive amount of body heat made it seem like a weighted blanket had been thrown over him. But Branch forced himself not to give in to the instinct to flee. After only about 5 or 6 seconds, the discomfort was not only starting to wear off, but was quickly being replaced with relaxation. He was feeling very relaxed, actually, so much so that his eyes drifted shut. The grey loner was so deprived of physical affection that he had concluded that he was better off without it, content to live without it, determined to avoid it, and even convinced himself that he absolutely hated it. He never let himself wonder what he could be missing out on, never dared to give comfort a chance, certain that no form of affection would do him any good. Where was he wrong? Branch didn't feel trapped. He felt secure. If the hug hadn't ended when it did, he almost could have fallen asleep right where he stood. He had decided years ago that all affectionate gestures were pointless. Didn't matter who it was from or why they were offering it. But thanks to Poppy and the snack pack, Branch discovered that receiving affection and comfort from those who truly care about him had a much different effect than receiving it from just anyone, and all for no particular reason. Group hugs were still not something he'd like to make a daily habit of, but in moderation. Though Branch had still stressed over the tragic anniversary for 90% of the day, even just that tiny 10% of a distraction was a huge relief. Poppy had done so much for him today. Some things he'd lightly requested, and she accepted without question. Other things she'd done on her own, that she knew would ease his grief. She knew him so well now. Whereas before she would blindly try and lift his spirits in the least effective ways possible, now it was as if she could read his mind, knowing exactly what to say and do, and what not to say and do. How had Branch ever lived without Princess Poppy? The answer was right in the question. He hadn't lived. It had been a desolate, meaningless existence. Now he was actually living. He had never managed to cope this not utterly terribly with the tragic event. However, the day was not yet over, so technically wouldn't be over until tomorrow morning. So there was one final thing Branch wanted, no, needed to ask of her. Poppy practically begged him to let her help him, and she's proven she can and will in any way he needs. But this particular thing was making him quite uncomfortable.
But it's not a big deal. She does it all the time. It's a common thing for all trolls. It doesn't mean anything. Besides, it'll just be this once, and I really need this. Hey, Poppy?
At the sound of his stuttering voice, she span around instantly.
May I ask you for one last favour?
Of course you can.
Well, I was wondering if, as long as you don't mind.
Come on, just spit it out already. Stalling isn't going to make it any easier.
He scolded himself as she stared expectantly at him, with those piercing fuchsia eyes.
Is it alright if I stay at your pod tonight? It's just, the nights are the hardest, and I don't want to be alone this time.
Absolutely. You're more than welcome to stay. So Branch returned to his bunker to retrieve necessities to spend the night away. Meanwhile, Poppy worked on making her pod more Branch-friendly, turning off her music box, closing her curtains, put away any and all glittery items, cleaned up her bathroom and table to make space for his stuff, and organised her pod in general. It was getting messy, even by her own low standards. I'll need to grab my extra pillow. Hopefully he'll bring his coffee maker because I don't have one. I don't know if he'll feel like playing games, but I'll bring some out anyway. Oh, can't forget the snacks. What else am I missing? Poppy didn't usually make such a fuss over simple sleepovers. But this was not just any sleepover. It will be the first time Branch has stayed over at her place, and the first sleepover he's had since he was a little trolling. He had rejected all her slumber party invitations, and now he had asked her to have a sleepover? Plus, Branch wasn't your typical ordinary troll. He was going to be a unique guest. He's extra special to her, and this was intended to be for comfort and companionship more than a fun hangout. For all of those reasons, Poppy wanted this to be as perfect as possible for her closest friend. A shy smile appeared on the princess's face as she set down the games onto the table. I hope he'll want to cuddle. There's no better way to relax and be comforted. She could already feel her arms around Branch's sturdy body, and his strong yet gentle arms around her in return. She could see his closed eyes and contented smile on his handsome face, right there beside her. They would fall asleep together. But would it be her or him to drift off first? Then she would wake up beside him, just like the night of the cyan. A knock on the door made Poppy let out a startled squeak as her thought bubble shattered. Come on in, Branch, she called from across the room. Tentatively, her guest let himself in, carrying his fully packed green and brown knapsack. Welcome to my pod. I've got a spot over here for all your things. And if there's anything you need, just let me know. I have tons of sleepovers and slumber parties, so I have tons of extra supplies on hand. She gave Branch a few minutes of silence to unpack his main belongings and get settled in the unfamiliar territory. Then she added, I'm not sure what you feel like doing. I brought out some games and books and a snack tray, unless you'd rather get straight to bed. He thought for a moment.
You and I haven't played games in a while. Let's do that.
Great! Oh, actually, sorry, before we do that, would you mind giving me a hand with this scrapbook? I need it done by tomorrow evening, so I'm kind of running out of time. I did not think it would take me this long.
I guess. But you know I'm not very good at scrapbooking.
No, I don't know that. I know that you are a beginner scrapbooker, and that doesn't mean you're not good at it. It just means you're still learning. Besides, all I need you to do is cut out some different shapes out of different coloured papers. I'll do all the layout and gluing. So the two trolls settled at the table. Poppy handed Branch some small blue scissors, plus a pile of papers with half a different assorted colours, and instructed which shape she needed cut. While they both worked on separate tasks, She maintained a comfortable amount of chit-chat. Not enough to annoy him, but just enough to keep his thoughts on the present. Within 40 minutes the shapes were cut and a large portion of the scrapbook was complete. Enough that the pair could move on to a new activity. A board game, this time mousetrap and free. While playing, Poppy thought about earlier, when Branch had joined their group hug. Actually, she hadn't stopped thinking about it since it happened. He had gone from no hugging at all, to allowing only her to hug him, to willingly hugging her, and now he let multiple other trolls hug him all at once. A burst of happiness jolted through Poppy. It made her lean over and give him a quick side hug. A quick but forceful squeeze around the shoulders. As she released him, he gave her a cute look that clearly said,
"What was that for?"
But he shrugged slightly and went back to the game, deciding he didn't require an explanation for a spontaneous Poppy hug. An hour later, while Branch was getting ready in the other room, Poppy settled onto the far side of her bed. She carefully positioned the second pillow beside hers, making sure to leave her reserved companion a generous amount of space. She then opened up the green with purple flower patterned blankets on his side, making sure they folded over perfectly. She had had hundreds of sleepovers before. Each of her friends had slept in her bed at least 4 or 5 times. But tonight, her heart beat fast as she waited for her guest's return. When Branch reappeared, Poppy watched out of the corner of her eye as he approached her bed. Then he paused right in front of the nightstand, kneeling down to look through his knapsack. So the princess patiently waited for him to join her. But he didn't. Instead, she noticed Branch had pulled out a pale green sleeping bag and was placing it on the carpet beside her bed. Poppy opened her mouth to object, then quickly closed it. This is his first ever official sleepover. Other than our Cyan Stars night, he's used to sleeping completely alone, underground and far away from everyone. She reminded herself, if he doesn't feel like cuddling, that's fine. If this is what makes him comfortable, then it is what's best. That's all that matters right now, that he's comfortable. She forced a little twinge of selfish disappointment away and said affectionately, "Good night, Branch. I hope you can sleep okay. If you need anything, just let me know. Okay?"
"Okay. I will."
"Sure you'll be comfy enough down there?" She couldn't stop herself from trying a little bit.
"Yeah. This'll be perfect. Thanks again for letting me stay, Poppy. Thank you for everything you did today. It means the world and more to me. Good night."
"Good night." Poppy shifted back into the centre of her bed, still missing the closeness that could be, but mostly happy to have him much nearer than normal. She hoped her mere presence was enough to help him rest on this difficult night. Her mere presence did make him feel much more relaxed, but, in truth, Branch longed to be much closer to Poppy. However, he would have also felt severely awkward if he was that much closer to her. Their strong feelings for each other were mutual, but they were still technically within the friend status, which would make being intimately close both comfortable and uncomfortable at the same time. Battling with such conflict would certainly not help him relax. Sure, they had slept side by side during the Cyan Stars, but that was basically an accident that took place out in the woods, not an intentional decision taking place in her cozy pod, in her bed, under her blankets. Branch had noticed the second pillow, and the only reason she would have put it there and left over half the bed unoccupied would be for him to use it. He figured she was more disappointed than she'd let on, and he really hoped he hadn't hurt her feelings. But he couldn't bring himself to just go for it. Sharing a bed with her seemed like way too big of a hair stretch right now.
It feels strange enough to be sleeping in a bright pink pod with another troll nearby. Plus, I still have other things on my mind right now. So for both of those reasons, I wouldn't be able to enjoy being close to her anyway. Considering the circumstances, it's probably best to stick with the basics. have my closest friend nearby in hopes that it'll help me get some sleep.
Confident this was the right decision, Branch shifted once more in his sleeping bag, tugging the blanket up to his chin, then closed his eyes. Poppy was in the middle of a lovely dream. She discovered a beautiful sparkling purple cave in the forest, and after exploring it and deeming it to be safe, she decided to turn it into an attraction for the village. She was excitedly discussing her plans with the snack pack, when, suddenly, an ear-piercing scream interrupted their conversation. Poppy's eyes shot open. She was in her pod, in her bed, in the middle of the night. That loud, agonizing cry had seemed so real, but her surroundings were calm and quiet, except for heavy, ragged breathing. With a massive jolt of dread, Poppy remembered that she wasn't alone. In a flurry of blankets, she quickly rolled over to check on her guest. As she suspected, the piercing scream had been real. She could see Branch sitting straight up in his sleeping bag, his wild, terror-stricken eyes visible even in the darkness. The pink princess practically threw herself down onto the floor. She landed kneeling beside him, immediately wrapping her arms around his shoulders and head. She offered him soft words of comfort and reassurance, as she had done the last time he experienced a nightmare in her presence.
But this was so much worse. Much worse.
For a startling amount of time, he didn't even seem to be aware that someone was holding on to him. Poppy could feel his heart pounding violently throughout his entire body. He wasn't just trembling. He was visibly shaking, as if he'd been submerged in icy water. He was shaking so badly that, once he recovered from the initial shock, it was a challenge for him to settle his arms around her. His unfocused eyes finally closed as he burst into tears, shifting closer to her while also pulling her closer, until his whole body melded against hers like a puzzle piece. It took twice as long for Branch to even begin to recover. After almost 10 minutes, his sobbing and wheezing finally began to dwindle, but he did not loosen his grip or shift away from her. His heart was still beating rather abnormally, and his tense body was still vibrating. A few minutes later, Poppy reached her hair across her bed to retrieve the glass of water on her nightstand. She held it up to his mouth and softly encouraged him to take a few tiny sips. After setting down the glass, she caressed his cheek with one hand, while another still rubbed his back. Another minute or two later, and she loosely encircled him and herself with her hair to stimulate a blanket around them, trying anything to make him feel safe. Over 5 more minutes passed before Branch finally spoke, his voice thick and mumbled.
I'm sorry for waking you. I didn't mean to scare you.
Don't even think about apologizing for waking me up. Poppy soothed him in a soft whisper, reaching her thumb to wipe away a stray tear. And you didn't scare me. Who was she kidding? Her heart was racing almost as badly as his had been. I mean, you did, obviously, but not like that. I wasn't scared of you. I was scared because I was worried about you. But I am so glad you were here with me. For a second, she pictured Branch being in his bunker at this very moment. All alone. Way underground. Nowhere near any civilization. Poppy almost whimpered, but quickly shut off the heart-wrenching image. No need to think about that. It didn't happen. He's right here with me, and he's going to be all right. With a sigh of relief, she held him even closer. Whenever you're ready to talk about it, tonight or tomorrow or next month, I'm here. He stayed silent in her arms for a while, his head resting against her shoulder, his body beginning to relax, his distress finally easing. Very gradually, Branch's grip around her torso loosened, and he sat up a bit straighter. After some unintelligible sentences, his words became clearer.
I was out in the open, in that tree, and A Bergen was reaching toward me.
And your grandma pushed you out of the way, again, Poppy whispered in a sympathetic whisper, but Branch shook his head.
No, you did.
The princess was taken aback. His simple sentence had to replay a couple of times in her ears, before she could fully register what he was saying.
I saw the Bergen coming. I heard your warnings. I heard you telling me to run, but I couldn't move, so you ran towards me, and you saved me.
Tears beginning to overflow again, and his quiet voice grew even more uneven.
You saved me, but it took you. Then I still couldn't move. I just watched as it took you away. You were gone because of me.
Poppy's heart felt as though that Bergen's claws were squeezing it. She couldn't even imagine the pain Branch was feeling right then. Breaking every bone in his body probably would have hurt less. She wanted to remind him that it was all just a dream. She wanted to tell him that she was right there. She wanted to assure him that something like that could never happen. But all of those phrases sounded so raw, so empty. Of course it was just a dream. Obviously she was right there. But while that exact scenario wasn't possible, something strikingly similar did happen to Branch, and it permanently traumatized him. They were completely safe from the Bergens now, secure in their fun village deep within the beautiful forest, miles and miles away from Bergen Town. But that didn't mean those horrifying images could just vanish from Branch's memory. That's why he was always so opposed to them throwing loud parties, and paranoid about the Bergens finding them. He wasn't trying to disrupt their fun. He was trying to protect them. He didn't want anyone else, or anyone else's loved ones, to suffer the same fate. This also reminded her, and put into perspective, why he'd been so determined to never have any loved ones. The risk of possibly losing them, or even worse, losing them as a result of his own actions. The subconscious fear of happily living with a special someone, only to have them taken away and be left with nothing once again. The thought of another important person in his life giving up their own life to save his, being constantly plagued with horrible what-if scenarios, often knowing how exaggerated or unrealistic they are, but being unable to control them nonetheless. Branch is finally certain that I truly care about him, and that must soothe him and terrify him all at the same time. No wonder he was always so hesitant about being my friend, wanting to be around me one minute, and then believing he should stay away from me the next, afraid to enjoy himself in case something bad happens again. So instead of blurting out aimless words, Poppy offered her dearest friend a much more effective comfort. She pulled him into another tender embrace, this time spiraling her hair gently around his, to which he automatically returned both gestures. As Branch let himself cry for a bit longer, Poppy hoped he was unable to detect her own sniffles. She didn't need him to try and comfort her, when she was the one who was supposed to be comforting him. And she definitely didn't want him to feel bad about upsetting her. Her feeling a bit upset, or even a lot upset, was nothing compared to what Branch had experienced. She had plenty of happiness to spare, and would gladly give some up if it meant it would help him feel even a tad better. Branch buried his face into the princess's shoulder, wanting to hold on to her forever. How could something that did not happen feel like it really had happened? Poppy was right here, right beside him. She was completely safe. Yet, somehow, it seemed like she wasn't. Like he needed more proof. He had experienced nightmares about Poppy being taken by a Bergen for various reasons, and many repeats of Grandma Rosiepuff saving him. but never this. His grandma on his mind all day, plus Poppy by his side all day, had morphed into this doubly traumatizing scene. Well over half an hour had passed since Branch jolted awake. After Poppy offered him another sip of water, she noticed his head was starting to feel heavy against her, and his eyelids were flickering. So, after placing a light kiss on his forehead, she offered, "Would you feel better if you're closer to me? Up there?" She gestured to her bed, "Instead of way down here on the floor?" He nodded without hesitation, too shaken to feel awkward about that request, and too exhausted to object anyway. Following Poppy's lead, Branch climbed onto the soft, fluffy mattress. As he settled, she tossed the thick blanket over him and tucked it in around him. The poor grey troll looked like he didn't have a drop of energy left. He nestled into her side, groggily draping his arm over her torso, then drowsingly kissing her on the cheek, much to her pleasant surprise, and was out like a light the second his head touched the pillow. When Branch blinked his eyes open, the magenta walls with a dozen photo frames, shelves with cute decorations, and a table of colourful craft supplies didn't confuse or surprise him. Poppy's pod was remarkably cosy, wrapped up in the nice warm blanket with a thick pillow and soft mattress. He didn't want to move. It was definitely an upgrade from waking up in the plain brown walls, plain brown shelves, and a plain brown table. His old mattress, thin patchy blanket, and flat pillow were quite uncomfortable in comparison. Branch practically rolled over. Poppy was already gone. The pink clock on the far nightstand read 10:25, so she'd likely been gone for more than 3 hours. She hadn't opened the curtains, so he couldn't judge what time it was. She must have kept them fully closed so he wouldn't be woken up by the light, and could sleep as long as possible. As he rolled back into his original position, memories of last night slowly appeared in his vision. A little bit of scrapbooking they did, then the mousetrap and free board game they played, followed by him settling into his sleeping bag on the floor. Then there was the harsh awakening in the middle of the night. Tentatively, Branch let the details of the dreadful nightmare enter his mind, hoping it wouldn't cause him to panic. While the dream still unsettled him, the initial terror seemed to have subsided. He moved on to the memory of Poppy holding him, comforting him.
Poppy, if it hadn't been for her...
He shut his eyes tightly and shivered despite the thick blanket.
I don't even want to imagine what would have happened to me.
Then he reopened his eyes.
But I don't need to, because Poppy was right there for me.
After a stretch and a yawn, Branch slowly sat up. He was stiff as a board from hair to toe, but only mildly tired, not bone-weary or miserable. Even with the awful midnight interruption, it was still by far the best sleep he'd ever gotten on that night. He wished he'd just gotten in Poppy's bed in the first place. Being close to her had definitely helped. At least, he assumed it did. The part about him snuggling in as she covered him with a blanket was nothing more than a blur. Branch could kind of recall putting his arm around Poppy. Or did she put her arm around him? He even had a split-second recollection of kissing her cheek. Did he actually do that? That seemed to be the foggiest part of the whole memory, so he decided it must have been another dream. As Branch's gaze drifted over to the other, nearer nightstand, he smiled. There was a plate of assorted berries and apple slices, a small glass of orange juice, and another sweet note. "Good morning, Branch. If this breakfast isn't enough, or you'd rather eat something else, feel free to help yourself to anything in the fridge or cupboards, and stay as long as you like. I'm going to be busy all day working with Dad, but I'll stop by your place tomorrow after lunch. P.S. I hope you're feeling better today. You deserve to feel all the happiness in the world. XOXO, Poppy." Late in the evening, Poppy returned to her pod with a heaping pile of scrapbooks in her arms. She could barely see where she was going, After awkwardly setting them down on her table, she peered around the room. Branch was no longer there, as she had expected. But what she didn't expect was the lovely bouquet on her nightstand. There had to be at least 10 different kinds of the prettiest wildflowers, all varying pinks, purples, and hints of yellow. The style didn't resemble any florist she knew. Branch must have made it himself. The beautiful green vase was not one of hers. He must have traded a hefty handful of his own valuables to get a hold of such a nice vase. Her bed was made, not in its usual throw the covers roughly into place. It was so perfect it looked like it belonged in a magazine. The plate and glass were no longer on the nightstand, but rather in the drying rack. He had washed them for her. The note that Poppy had left him was flipped over. She put her hand over her heart as she read the little message he had written on the back. There are trolls who make your day brighter, and your step lighter. That is what you do for me. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. Oh my god, that's gorgeous. And the way they all stand up for Branch at the pool, love that bit. But the piece de resistance is just how everyone is helping him cope. And I don't think it's even mentioned if the snack pack even knew it was the anniversary. But, oh, that nightmare sounded dreadful. I've had horrible nightmares recently. I had a beautiful dream last night, but, well, there are some nights where I just wake up and I've been so terrified I've had a panic attack as soon as I wake up in the morning. So I might not have experienced the tragedy Branch has, but I can definitely relate. There was one dream a few months ago where I don't remember a minute of it, or even a second. I just woke up and I was terrified, to the point where I burst out crying so much my sister heard me and came into the room just to see if I was okay. Then when I went downstairs to get a glass of water, both my parents immediately saw that what was going on, and my mum, without a word, just went up and gave me a big hug. Because sometimes that's what you need. And the way she's not bringing it up too much and just letting him process at his own rate, while keeping him distracted enough that it's not drowning him, that's amazing. She's helping him keep his head above water, but not forcing him to swim at her pace. I love that. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals and albino pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.